The Prime Ministerial Beauty Parade. The 5 contestants for the Tory leadership face questions over ugly betrayal, backroom deals and how to unite their party and the country after Brexit. Good evening. The leadership contest consuming Britain's governing party has been compared to an episode of Game of Thrones. But today, the soap opera got serious, with each of the contenders setting out why he or she has what it takes to lead a country split down the middle by the Brexit vote. Opponents of the favourite, the Home Secretary Theresa May, have rejected suggestions she should be installed without a contest, saying she lacks the moral authority to take the UK out of the European Union. I've been speaking to Mrs May's main challenger. And in that other leadership tussle, Jeremy Corbyn's allies invoke the Queen's call for calm as they attempt to warn off the enemies plotting to unseat him. And carnage during Ramadan as bomb attacks by militants kill 120 in Baghdad. So all 5 Conservative leadership contenders have some tricky questions to answer. Today they got the chance in a series of TV interviews. The Justice Secretary, Michael Gove, defended his betrayal of Boris Johnson, insisting it would have been a betrayal of this country if he'd stuck with the former London mayor. Meanwhile, Theresa May has vowed she's up for a fight, scotching suggestions that for the sake of unity and certainty, she should be anointed leader. Simon Israel reports.
This is as close as cameras got today, outside of a BBC studio, to one candidate for Prime Minister. Behind the headrest on the right sat Michael Gove.
Mr Gove, can anyone trust you?
In his wake lies a vengeful and bitter trail for, as Boris Johnson's sister put it, pushing her brother under a bus and running over him several times. Today, Mr Gove went on TV to proffer an explanation.
Right until the 11th hour, I was talking to parliamentary colleagues and friends, seeking to persuade them that Boris could lead this country and could be Prime Minister. But in the final 24 hours, there were actions that were taken, decisions that were ducked, that led me to believe...
Which actions and which decisions? Because this really matters.
It's been laid out in some clarity in the newspapers. Boris had the opportunity to build a team. Boris had the opportunity to lay out a particular vision in the last 24 hours, and I felt that he did not step up to that challenge, and there was a deadline.
Pressed further on how he could have politically assassinated an old and trusted friend in such a humiliating way, Mr Gove was defiant.
I withdrew my support for Boris. Boris could have chosen to go on if he wished to. The fact that he didn't, I think, is telling, and one of the things that I would say is that my judgment about what is right for this country will always guide me.
Pitching to be PM with the label political serial killer is going to make it very difficult for Michael Gove. His heart, he said, had guided him to stand. But there are a lot of other hearts, both at Westminster and in the Tory party, that have little love for a man who admits to putting friends second to political ambition. The front-runner remains Theresa May, even though she was a Remain campaigner. In another TV studio, she defended her record on immigration, despite missing targets. She said there was no silver bullet and warned numbers may go up in the coming months.
Once we get the issue of the EU negotiation sorted, the right deal for Britain, we may very well see in the run-up to that people wanting to come here to the UK before that exit happens. So there are factors that you can't always predict what the timing and numbers of those will be.
Her closest rival, Andrea Leadsom, was also on the circuit today. The Energy Minister said she'd been on a journey since saying back in 2013 that to leave the EU would be a disaster. Now, she says, she wants to push the Article 50 button much sooner than the other candidates.
Well, earlier I spoke to Andrea Leadsom, who you saw at the end of that piece, and I started by asking her whether she'd feel a sense of responsibility if the country became mired in another recession.
Well, you know, of course, Of course I would, but I genuinely believe that the opportunity from leaving the EU is an enormous one for the UK. Now, there are headwinds, and those have got nothing to do with us leaving the EU. You know, the slowing down in Asian markets, some of the problems in North American markets. There are some headwinds, and those were there before our referendum was even called. So, you know, I absolutely recognise that that our economy now needs to sort of get a grip. We need to take some policy choices. We need to absolutely start talking about free trade agreements with the rest of the world. We need to start the negotiations with the European Union. I'm absolutely confident we will be able to continue with tariff-free trading, and that the opportunities for the UK will be enormous.
If you're absolutely clear that you've got the decision right on Brexit, economically speaking, has the social turmoil given you any pause for thought? For example, police chiefs saying that there's been a 5-fold rise in race hate complaints. Does that worry you? Do you have a tiny sort of scintilla of self-doubt over that?
I certainly absolutely loathe any form of racist, any sort of hate race hate, anything of that sort is absolutely terrible and unacceptable. And, you know, I of course would not condone anything like that. But equally, I do believe there is a huge opportunity from leaving the EU for giving young people better skilled jobs, decent pay, decent jobs, a more empowered future. And I think that, you know, that's the decision we've taken. You know, there is no element of that that is about racism. And of course, I deeply regret any unrest.
Let's talk about the leadership. You've thrown your hat in the ring. You're going to set out your campaign tomorrow. But if you agree with Michael Gove that the leader should be a Brexiteer, that there should be a choice, why didn't you back him?
Oh, I didn't know Michael was standing. I put my nomination papers in late Wednesday night, and that was my decision, was because I felt we needed more choice for people to make on the Leave side of the argument.
So you'd be quite happy for the Prime Minister and the Conservative leader to be Michael Gove, or do you think, as Boris Johnson's sister does, that he's, quote, a political psychopath run by his wife?
You know, I don't believe any of that stuff. You know, I think both Michael Gove and Boris Johnson really, you know, put everything on the line to do what they believe in, which is that Britain would be better off outside of the European Union. You know, I think it was a real shame, a real tragedy what happened last week, and that's all I really want to say about it.
Well, you were the kind of femme fatale in all of this, weren't you? Because Boris Johnson was supposed to offer you a job. He didn't. You then text him saying, no tweet, no letter. Clearly you don't want to go ahead on the basis we agreed, and that's when the whole thing fell apart and Michael Gove decided to put his name forward. How do you feel being the kind of femme fatale in this whole Tory leadership saga?
Yeah. I'm absolutely not a femme fatale. That is definitely not me. No, I just, as I say, I decided late on Wednesday night after talking to my family at some length that I was going to put my name forward because I believed that we needed more candidates on the Leave side, a diverse range of candidates for people to be able to choose from.
You've really worn your heart on your sleeve in the last few days of campaigning, and, you know, you haven't even launched the campaign officially yet. For example, you've admitted in a newspaper interview today that you pray a lot. Alistair Campbell, Tony Blair's Director of Communications, once said that politicians don't do God. Do you think you can?
Well, you know, I'm a human being like any other. I do what I do, and my faith is very important to me. So I'm the person I am, and I'm very straight, and so I will just say it as I see it. And at the end of the day, as I've said, you know, I just want to be out there for people to choose from, one of the people that they have to choose from. I want to make my pitch, and I will be the person I am. I'm not going to not do things or do things. I don't want to manipulate it. I want to just be who I am and see if that works.
And in terms of the way you voted on same-sex marriage, you were one of only 5 Conservatives to abstain in that vote. Is that something you'd want to clarify now?
Well, I positively abstained, and I wrote very clearly on my website exactly why. And it was specifically because I absolutely believe that the love of same-sex couples is every bit as valuable, you know, to them and, as it happens, in the eyes of God, as any other. But equally, you know, for so many Christians, marriage can only be between a man and a woman. And I just couldn't, in all conscience, either vote only against or only for. So I decided to vote in both lobbies. I've never done it before then, and you know, it was a very, very difficult decision for me.
But you don't think you got that decision wrong?
No, I don't think so. I'd do the same today.
Andrea Leadsom talking to me earlier. Well, you wait several years for a leadership contest and then two come along at once, or not if the Labour leader and his union friends have their way. The leader of the trade union Unite has claimed that Jeremy Corbyn is the victim of a political lynching. Len McCluskey insisted that the unions can broker a peace deal for Labour. But former Prime Minister Tony Blair said that while he won't intrude on the internal party ructions, the opposition badly needs credibility. Simeon Brown has this.
Are you still holding on, Jeremy?
Sunday is supposed to be a day of rest, but for Labour's big beast, there was no break from the party's tug of war over Jeremy Corbyn's leadership, a war that has taken its toll. This morning, Tony Blair fired these words.
Right now, at this moment of time, this country needs an opposition that is capable of challenging the government, holding it to account, and representing those millions of people out there who are thinking back on the last week and thinking our country's been changed and we've got no one to represent us.
The head of Unite, the party's major donor, called the attempt to remove Labour's leader a political lynching.
He said he's got no intentions of stepping down, and that's why I've said that Angela and Owen and anybody else who are decent people, they shouldn't plunge the Labour Party into a civil war that will be very ugly. And I'm saying that the trade unions, the trade union general secretaries who've always been the rock within the Labour Party, can broker a peace.
But another former Labour leader said it was best for the party if Jeremy Corbyn left.
But the problem is that from the doorsteps, from the communities, we know very well that people who need Labour will not vote Labour simply because Jeremy they consider to be a leader lacking credibility.
Corbyn's leadership win last year was branded a win for young people. Many of these teenagers campaigning for the right to vote at 16 said they had supported him then. But after Brexit, what do they think now?
I'd say Jeremy Corbyn is a really good politician. I feel like he's a really good opposition to the Conservative Party, but I think he's kind of had his time and he needs to step down.
I quite like Jezza Corbs. I think he's got the right idea.
I supported Jeremy Corbyn, and I think that possibly now is the time for him to stand down, and I think now is the time to bring in a new face, a new leadership, and create a more united party. But I do think that all the political parties are divided at the moment.
Europe has been at the heart of this divide. For these teenagers, Brexit may become as big an issue as the Iraq War was for the generation before them, who on Wednesday will get answers when the Chilcot report is finally published, an event that will have major repercussions for Labour leaders past, present and future.
Well, I'm joined now by the Labour MP Mike Gapes and the journalist and Jeremy Corbyn supporter Michael Segeloff. Mike Gapes first. This has to be the most inept coup in political history, doesn't it? I mean, you fatally wounded your leader, but he's still clinging on, isn't he?
Actually, he fatally wounded himself by the inept way that he campaigned in the European referendum. There wouldn't have been this vote of no confidence on Monday.
Which isn't binding, so you've got to put up and shut up.
He has a responsibility as leader to provide for an effective parliamentary performance, for an effective parliamentary party, and 80% of members of Parliament of the Labour Party, including the large number, more than 60, that Jeremy himself had appointed to his team, have voted his no confidence.
OK, Michael, that's the point, isn't it? Jeremy Corbyn does not have the backing of his MPs, the vast majority. Therefore, it's terminal, isn't it?
Well, I'd argue that he's not fatally wounded whatsoever. We just remember, Jeremy didn't command the support of the Parliamentary Labour Party before his election to leadership either. As it stands now, he still commands the support of the trade unions, the majority of Labour Party members and voters. And they're surely the people who should be deciding the future of the Parliamentary Labour Party.
He doesn't control the support of the majority of Labour voters. Large numbers of Labour voters didn't take his advice in the referendum campaign, and large numbers of Labour voters in the north of England, and that's why MPs from Yorkshire and the north are mainly behind this move. They are going away from us, and we can see the writing on the wall. Labour will get wiped out in an early election if Jeremy's leader.
So if you can see the writing on the wall, you've got to put up or shut up pretty rapidly, haven't you?
I'm sure there will be a candidate who comes forward in the near future.
In the next 24 hours?
No, I'm not predicting that. But what I am absolutely certain is that it would be much better for the party if Jeremy recognised reality and stood down.
Isn't that the case that the party now, Michael, is turning into a laughing stock? You know, you haven't... A lot of these front-bench posts, I went to the website earlier today, there's all these people who've quit that are still on the website. I mean, it's really turning into a joke, isn't it?
I mean, the country is currently in the midst of a political crisis. You haven't got a leader of the Conservative Party, future Prime Minister up for grabs, pound dropping, Brexit's happened. I think we've got priorities that hopefully overcome updating the website. In terms of the future of the Labour Party, though, let's be clear, we're about to get the Chilcot inquiry back. The biggest investigation...
Into the Iraq War.
Into the Iraq War, I should say, which Jeremy Corbyn stood alongside, consistently saying was the worst judgment call made by politicians in a generation, sorry. People like Mike not only voted for the war in Iraq, but voted against any form of judicial inquiry time and time again. I think it's
true. We voted to have an inquiry after our troops had left, and that was the proposal that came under Gordon Brown, and I did vote for that.
But isn't the point that the Chilcot inquiry comes out in a few days' time? If Jeremy Corbyn's still at the helm, he's going to have a lot more support in the country if he, for example, as reported, accuses Tony Blair of war crimes.
Well, let's make it absolutely clear. This is not about Chilcot. Jeremy's supporters want it to be about Chilcot. They want it to be about what happened in Iraq in 2003. The reality is this is about, can we have a credible Labour leader who can win an election? And Jeremy Corbyn palpably cannot do that.
But do you think you've got to move before Chilcot is published?
I don't know that it would make any difference whether there was a move before or after Chilcot is published, because it depends on Jeremy. Does Jeremy wish to have us put through months of internal conflict, or does he wish to have a situation where the party can elect a new leader from a new generation to take us to some chance of winning the next election?
Michael, this is about Jeremy himself, and there's lots of reports that he's deeply unhappy, his family feel under pressure. He'd like to call it quits, but he's somehow being prevented from doing so by his press aide and his closest allies.
Well, I couldn't comment on the internal workings of his office. What I can say is, of course, it's an unpleasant position to be in when your colleagues in Parliament are continually trying to undermine the work that you're doing. For instance, the idea that Jeremy is unelectable. If you look at every parliamentary by-election we've had since he came into power, we've increased the majority vote share the Labour Party has had in those votes.
Well, so an opposition should do, really.
Quite rightly, but this idea that he's unelectable, having been in office for under a year and not had a chance to face a general election without the support of his colleagues in Parliament like Mike, I don't really understand how we can have someone sitting here telling me we need to find a replacement when we haven't got one.
Why did the Labour vote drop 9% in Wales? Why did we get the terrible results in Scotland where we came third? Why we only won in London because we had an excellent candidate in Sadiq Khan who fought from a centre-left position, not a far-left position?
Michael, that must worry you.
I would argue the reason the Labour Party has failed in 2010 and 2015 to come to any form of electoral success is because they were part of the same political disenfranchisement we've seen, voting for the war in Iraq, producing mugs that said immigration controls must be in place.
Just very briefly, aren't you bullying a man who's nearing his 70s?
I think that's a ridiculous argument. The situation is not one of bullying. It's Labour MPs saying they have no confidence in any organisation. In a council, for example, if a Labour group says it has no confidence in a leader, he has to go.
Mike Gapes, Michael Segeloff, thank you very much for joining me. And 13 years after the end of the Iraq War we were just talking about there, overnight at least 120 people have been killed and over 150 injured in 2 bomb explosions. The first device exploded in a shopping area near a restaurant in central Baghdad, the second in a popular market. The first blast occurred at 1 a.m. local time. A car bomb exploded in a crowded street, destroying cars and shops. Fire then hampered rescue efforts. The streets were packed at the time. Many people had gathered for a religious festival which will mark the end of Ramadan. Dozens of children were among the dead and injured. The second blast took place shortly afterwards at another market in the district of Shab in eastern Baghdad. Officials say that was probably caused by a booby-trapped car. The Iraqi Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi visited the scene of the blast a few hours later, but was met by angry crowds who attacked his convoy with stones and bricks. The bombings come just a week after Iraqi security forces took back the city of Fallujah from the so-called Islamic State and made other inroads into IS-held territory. In a statement, the Prime Minister's office said the attacks were a result of the militants being crushed on the battlefield, claiming that victory over these terrorist groups is very close. After the break, no day of rest for Wimbledon as Sunday becomes a match day thanks to the rain of week one. Welcome back. Well, it's been a very active day down at Wimbledon where, because so many games fell foul of the weather last week, there was plenty to watch on a normally sleepy Sunday. After the shock of Novak Djokovic's defeat, there was no such fate awaiting the women's #1, Serena Williams. Here's our sports reporter, Jordan Jarrett Bryan.
Serena Williams had to come through her second-round match against Christina Macau the hard way on Friday, and it didn't look like the world #1 was going to have it all her own way from the start against German Annika Beck. But the world's best immediately broke back.
Here's Williams.
There isn't normally any tennis played at Wimbledon on Middle Sunday, and Williams was doing her best to get on and off court as soon as possible. In recent Grand Slams, Williams has struggled to get the better of her opponents in the close matches, but there was no such problem today as she brutally disposed of the German. Beck was soon put out of her misery. Williams won her 300th Grand Slam match, but it's the pursuit of a record-breaking 22nd Grand Slam major the American is really focused on.
We're back tomorrow at midday and the usual time of 7. Until then, that's Channel 4 News. Good evening.